Here we look at James Macarthur, the son of wool baron John Macarthur. Now, James was born in Parramatta in 1798, the fourth son of Captain John and Mrs. Elizabeth Macarthur, whom we know. James had three brothers, Edward, John and William. A little bit like, I guess, modern dynastic families, and powerful ones at that, the sons were educated and trained to be future leaders of their respective parts of their father's enormous colonial and wealthy land holdings. I'm Michael Beashall, Australian historical fiction writer, and here we look at James Macarthur's input into the early colonial period, as to what extent he was able to assist his father and his brothers in implementing the vision that the Macarthurs believed was the true and fairest way to run New South Wales, of which we've spoken a lot of, that particular viewpoint. Largely a carbon copy of what the English class system was all about. Now, James was educated as a young man privately in Sydney by tutors, which was a norm for those sort of people, and he was also tutored in London and was trained in the financial arts by a broker in London. Now, unlike his brother John, who was going to read law in England and represent the family's business in the mother country, James, with his brother William, would be responsible for the vast pastoral holdings in New South Wales. Their other brother Edward would go into the military in England. Follows the aristocratic English line of families. Returning to New South Wales in 1817, James proved to be an efficient and capable landowner and manager, especially with his own acreage in Sutton Forest, and implementing mechanical irrigation, would you believe. James was more like his mother in personality than his father. William, on the other hand, was an unstable personality, and he would vary between moods, and perhaps this was inherited as his father suffered bouts of paranoia towards the end of his life. William treated his convict labour fairly, with good clothing and rations, but he had little faith in them, and this would guide his attitude towards that class for the rest of his life. In June of 1824, he became a partner in the Australian Agricultural Company, which went bankrupt in 1827, 3 years later, a fact which was largely kept secret. Now, there is an interesting story when James Macarthur visited a warehouse in England to examine some of the fleece that their acreage had provided. When the wool buyer opened bale number 24 in front of James, some bits of dung dropped on the floor, and the wool buyer said in a loud voice, "Methinks, friend, this would have enriched the soil from whence it came." The wool buyer, a Quaker, went on to extol the fineness of the wool as being the best in the world. Just a little anecdote. When James returned to New South Wales in 1831, he found out that his older brother John had died in London, a blow nearly fatally striking down the elder Captain John Macarthur, his father. James was now, like unwilling kings and vice presidents and leaders of family in the past and future, to take on the new role of leading the family. It wasn't planned, it just happened. So we now come to the point of land ownership and the new arrangement of how land was purchased. Now, they were the two of the biggest land owners in New South Wales, so any new regulations brought in would affect them greatly. And we've talked about the conversation he had with William Charles Wentworth. When James' own father John died in 1834, the Australian newspaper made little comment, as was expected, being run by Robert Wardell and Wentworth, fierce enemies of Macarthur. The Sydney Gazette was hypocritical in its praise of the man whom they had criticised all through his career. Go figure. James became the Squire of Camden. He had zealous plans of management of his father's properties, which had all the hallmarks of realism, thrift and practicality. During Governor Richard Burke's tenure of the colony, James Macarthur was the one who took one of two petitions to London signed by the elite of New South Wales society condemning the opposition petition, which called for a more representative legislature, like a legislative assembly as we have today, a lower house. James Macarthur wanted the Legislative Council to continue, and that only people of money, wealth power and property should have a seat on any board not open to a representative universal franchise. My God, you couldn't give everybody the vote. And women, forget it. This was the 19th century, don't forget. James MacArthur was the author of a book called New South Wales, Its Present State and Future Prospects. When this was published in New South Wales in 1837, it was panned by the Australian newspaper as being just a propaganda for the Tory party. In 1838, James MacArthur married a young woman of fortune, Emily Stone, the daughter of a Lombard Street banker. Handy catch. There is one good story about the wedding gifts, not what the MacArthurs newly married received, but what James MacArthur gave to his old friend Thomas Hobbs Scott. It was such an expensive present, we don't know the type, that Scott did at first refuse to accept it. It was quoted at the time that had Scott known of James MacArthur's true wealth, he would not have bothered to protest at all. We leave James MacArthur there in 1838 at the end of the early colonial period, as this is the period in which we're now concentrating now. I'm Michael Beashall. That's it for the MacArthurs, but for this period, but I'll be back in the future with other videos. Cheers for now.